Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, November the 23rd, 2024. It's becoming increasingly clear that we're living in a profoundly transformative moment in history, especially around AI, but it's not clear what kind of transformation we're going through. In Keith Tear's excellent weekly newsletter, That Was the Week, he touches on a lot of the issues associated with the future of AI. One of the essays is entitled The Tipping Point, Matthew Harris, which talks about how decentralization won an election. It seems the great theme these days is whether or not all this new technology will spur centralization or decentralization. Another of the essays that he links to this week is by Matt Mandel of Union Square Ventures. It's called Collaborative Intelligence, and I think it speaks of whether the AI revolution will compound the centralization of big tech or actually enable more decentralization. And another interesting post that he touches on is by John Gruber, the very distinguished Apple journalist who has his own media brand. It's called Daring Fireball, in which Gruber attacks the idea of Substack, suggesting that Substack is really not decentralized media, but re-centralized media. This is the theme that Keith touches on in the editorial. Keith, an interesting week. This issue of re-centralization and decentralization, it's one we've been through many times before. You and I have been through cycles, the Web 1 revolution, the Web 2 revolution. There was always the promise of decentralization, but always it seems as if tech has resulted in more centralization. Is that the dominant theme of this week's newsletter? That for all the promise of the decentralized network that AI offers, a lot of people fear that it's actually going to result in more centralization.
Yeah, you frame it very well, Andrew. That's exactly the competing essays this week. Look at things in different ways. I think it's worth tearing it apart a little bit and understanding a few things, because I actually don't think decentralization and centralization are opposites. I think they're twins or partners. Um, the entire internet is built on protocols that are inherently decentralized. So when you put in a router into your home and you publish, you basically are a node, a decentralized node on the internet. And if you had a web server there, people could access it right there in your house. So the internet itself is highly decentralized, but I can't think of a single business built on it that is equally decentralized. Businesses tend to be centralized. They benefit from, in fact, massively benefit from decentralized architectures, but they themselves are almost always, especially the successful ones, are almost always centralized.
Although, Keith, let me jump in here. We've had lots of shows in the past about the supposed Web 3 revolution. It seems a little archaic now. People are already talking about Web 4. But these decentralized corporations, which always seem more theory than practice, do you believe in those? Are there still conversations about that these days, particularly in the context of AI?
There's a lot of people that try to do those, but I would argue that's decentralized with a small d. There's still some kind of a brand raising funding to build those things. So they're not really decentralized. And, like working from home, which is clearly a trend, you could argue is decentralizing the companies, but it isn't. It's just a different way of working.
Right. I mean, if you're working from home for Google or Amazon, it doesn't make those companies any more decentralized.
Right. So I think what we've got here is some ideological zealotry that says decentralized is better. And no evidence at all that it exists.
Yeah, but you, of all people, Keith, talk about that as ideological zealotry. If that's the case, you are exhibit A on the ideological zealot list. You want decentralization. You don't want a strong state. You don't want people telling us what to do. You're not a corporate type.
Well, I think if you go into the realm of politics, even there, I do believe in centralization. I do like freedom, that's true, but I'm not convinced that freedom and decentralization are the same thing. I think, if there wasn't somebody making rules about roads or traffic lights or, education curriculums, probably we'd be worse off. So I think there's a balance. There's a clear balance, and you do need some authority, some centralized authority. Democracy probably relies on that. Otherwise, what are you voting for? Now, in the long run, and by the long run, I mean
The
capital
very
L.
long run. I mean, I'm not going to
Very
make. I
long
mean,
run.
you're tempting me to make the Keynes joke about what happens in the long run, but I'm going to refrain, Keith.
Yeah, in the long run, if we get to an abundant society where there's literally no work required because of automation and there's abundance, then the need for centralized authorities probably gets pushed out to the edge of life in your local area, and overarching global rules probably become very thin. But I think that's the very long run.
I was in New York this week. I was doing some interviews. As you know, I'm working with our friends at DLD. It's their 20th anniversary, their 20th event in January in Munich, and I'm talking to some of the old DLDs. I had a conversation with Douglas Rushkoff, my old friend in New York, this week, and I thought, Rushkoff is a smart guy, a very profound remark about AI. It seems obvious, but I haven't actually heard anyone make this remark. He said that AI is the first native app of the internet. And I think that is very important in terms of what we're talking about today. I'm sure you get what he's trying to say.
Well, it couldn't exist without it, because you need the cloud and you need massive compute power.
But it comes back to, and I'm trying to make sense of Rushkov. He's always very 5 steps ahead of everybody else, so we have to try and figure out what he meant. But in terms of the Mandel piece on collaborative intelligence, AI is quite literally that. AI, the AI revolution, the LLM revolution, is a form of collaborative intelligence. It's downloading our complete intelligence and trying to make it smarter with machines, which is it's a kind of a very sophisticated version of the original Google PageRank. So I think for him, this is the first time that the internet has an opportunity to, so to speak, flex its muscles in terms of and Rushkov is very much of a decentralization champion.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I know Rushkoff. He's mentioned, by the way, in this week's post of the week. We'll get to it later, but I know him because of that post. And I don't like it when people fetishize technologies. What's really happened is that this is the first time humans have been able to use tools to build something that has the promise of being better than them. And so I wouldn't say it's the internet's moment. I think it's humanity's moment. And
yeah, where that's where you're showing your ideological colors, Keith, because that's what you believe in, and for you, humanity is whatever you want it to be, like most people.
Yeah. By the way, we have someone from London on LinkedIn saying "Happy hi from London, where it's cold and rainy." And I don't know your name, whoever you are, because it just says LinkedIn user.
Like, it was cold and rainy in New York. It's less cold and rainy in the Bay Area. Although it was cold and rainy while I was away, it cheered up when I came back, which
It
is
poured down all day yesterday. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, but it is a moment. I mean, Rushkov isn't wrong to understand that it's a tipping point in the same way that the first essay talks about. The last 2 years collectively are the beginning of a tipping point.
right.
And that tipping point is about to accelerate due to what is in the Union Square article, which is the theme we've talked about the last couple of shows, which is the rise of agents that work together on behalf of us. That's just going to mean things become possible that previously weren't. And they talk about multi-agent systems. They don't really exist yet. I've started using an app called Cursor for coding, and Cursor is built on top of Chat GPT and also Claude, Anthropic, and it updates your code from a chat into your code without you having to do copy and paste that I previously had to do. So that's beginning to get a glimpse of the software
Yeah,
being.
it's glimpse, but it's very cloudy. And of course, the guys at USV, my friend Albert Vengo, really brilliant guy, Fred, whatever his name is at Union Square. They're all very smart. They're always 2 or 3 steps. They're like Rushkoff, except they make money out of it. Rushkoff sells books. I did want to touch on this first article, The Tipping Point, how decentralization won an election. You and I, neither of us, I'm speaking on your behalf, neither of us are great fans of the general hysteria, I think, about the Trump victory. And it's more interesting than just fascism or some other nonsense. How does it what does Matthew Harris suggest about the Trump victory, which speaks about the shifting architecture, the tipping point that you talk about? I mean, the tipping point is, of course, the title of his piece too.
Yeah. Well, he kind of he doesn't do it explicitly contrast with the Harris camp, but he makes a point that Donald Trump,
and he is Harris. I mean, it's Matthew Harris writing about, and Kamala Harris, of course, is not a relative.
Yeah. He talks about how Donald Trump leveraged podcasts, YouTube, especially podcasts, and how he did not really need to use mainstream media that much.
Which ignored him, which is astonishing, I thought, the mainstream, which makes them increasingly, it sort of digs their grave in deeper for them because it makes them archaic and irrelevant.
They definitely are archaic and irrelevant. It's interesting. I subscribe to the FT and the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and less insights are coming from them. They're kind of news fillers, but they're not really insight drivers.
Yeah, and they're better than the television networks. And one of the things that astonished me about the Trump election is that on the networks, the television networks, they never had Trump people. The only Republicans they ever invite on are people who are critical of Trump. I mean, it was a bizarre experience. And coming back to Harris's essay on the tipping point, how decentralization won an election, what captures that more than anything else is that the fact that the Kamala Harris group or people or whoever they are, they refused to go on Rogan because they didn't want to offend their campaign workers.
Yeah,
it's one of the most, if that's true, it's not only absurd, but the most symbolic example of how disastrous a campaign she ran, that she chose not to go on Rogan. She had the invitation. Whereas, of course, that's talking about native apps. It's Trump's native media. He loves going on Rogan. His whole life is Rogan.
Yeah. Well, look, Trump is a pig that likes rolling in the dirt. Harris is an elitist who brushes her teeth and doesn't go out without putting her makeup on.
And uses toilet paper, Keith.
And if she would have gone on Rogan, it would have been dirty for her.
Yeah, it's a pigsty, but that's the nature of media. That's the world we're living in.
So she basically, like Hillary Clinton before her, abhors real people and doesn't want to mix with them.
Bores, B-O-R-E-S or B-O-A-R-S?
The first, Andrew.
Yeah, in the pigsty, of course.
Yeah. And so that, now, funnily enough, Rogan, I think, is an example of re-centralization. His audience is so big that he's actually become a big center, even though he's running it himself. And so you get, I don't think Rogan fits into the decentralization.
This comes back, and I've been covering this for years. I mean, it's the old argument. You have the undermining of mainstream media, and then you have the rise of new media, and then you get people like Rogan, who are bigger than the FT and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal put together. And he has more power than Rupert Murdoch.
Right.
Why is this different? It's happened before, and it will happen again.
I don't think it is different. I mean, the main point I make in my editorial is that decentralization and centralization are not. They're both false. They're static concepts. In reality, you've got constant change, leveraging technology and the ability to gather an audience through it. You've got constant change, and anyone that's sitting on their hands thinking they can just keep doing what they used to do is going to be a big loser.
So we have two tendencies, shall we say. On the one hand, the power to destroy and undermine the current power holders, who tend to be centralized media of one kind or another, or centralized powers. But then the new powers which initially are champions of decentralization, are rebellious, themselves become traditional power holders. I mean, that's a familiar theme in history.
It is
many times before the internet. It's nothing to do with the internet.
Yeah, if only you and me could replace CNBC.
Well, I don't know. I think we're better than CNBC, which isn't saying much.
Yeah, but
I think they're selling off CNBC. It's one of the ironies of Trump. He himself is trailing behind history. He says he wants to destroy mainstream media, but he's already destroyed it. He doesn't need to shut down CNBC and MSNBC. They're already irrelevant.
Yeah. Did you read this week that Comcast is selling them off?
Yeah, it's our moment, Keith. Now.tv. We should buy it and reinvent media. Another subject, another week. Let's deal with Daring Fireball, because how does this all connect with Substack? The headline of your editorial this week is, and does Substack deserve the hate? Less people, more AI. You were triggered into this editorial by a piece on Daring Fireball by John Gruber, which oddly enough goes after Substack of all people, the angels. Why did Gruber go after Substack?
And he was inspired by another article that was attacking Substack from another well-known author, which is Anil Dash. Anil Dash published something called "Don't Call It a Substack." So they were triggered by this idea that that all of our newsletters are our Substacks, and they don't like Substack becoming stealing the branding of our newsletters by calling them a Substack. So that was the starting point. And, Gruber really goes for Substack. He kind of defends them a little bit early in his article, but then comes down on Anil Dash's side by the end. And it really is just a desire to be fully independent, which is another way of saying don't benefit from anybody's efforts where that person's brand is part of your brand.
But Gruber he has the luxury of having his own brand, so he doesn't need to rely on Substack. He has his own look and feel.
It's entirely possible to build a Substack using a tool called Ghost, and Ghost gets mentioned a lot in this article. And I've used Ghost. Ghost is like WordPress in the sense that you download it, you can do it for free if you can run your own server, or you can have them host it for, I don't know, it depends.
So you mean what you can do on, I didn't know this, and I'm on Substack, and this is on Substack. So we're talking about, this is the media and the message combined. So you can make Substack look more personalized, is that right?
Well, you can abandon Substack and transfer to Ghost, which is a technology. It has a company behind it that makes money, so it's not fully decentralized, but you can download their code and run it on your own server for free, like you can with WordPress. And their brand, you don't say this is my Ghost, you say this is Daring Fireball. And so there's a 1 degree more separation. You still pay them. You pay them a lot, by the way, because they charge you based on how many subscribers you have. If you use their services.
I mean, my thing on Substack,
I like being on Substack because it's easy.
It's not only as easy, but it's free. So
it's easy.
They don't make much money out of me because I don't make much of an effort. I'm going to make more of an effort next year to generate some revenue. But everything that they offer is free.
Yeah. So I was shocked by this Gruber piece. That's why I wrote about it. This is the first time someone serious has aggressively gone after Substack for being centralized. And I'd love to see Hamish McKenzie and Chris Best responding to that, because I think the benefits of centralization massively outweigh any negatives, for the reasons you just said. So there's really no space for a
Well, I think
complaint.
the one thing I got out of that, which I think is true, which it never really occurred to me, is the thing about Substack is it all has the same look and feel, but it doesn't mean that all the pieces are the same. I mean, you've got really interesting pieces, so it it's almost like a sort of a brand within a brand, and it's the same old issue of aggregation. I mean, the thing with Substack is I still don't think the business model makes sense. It makes much more sense to subscribe to 100 of the best Substack for X a year, and that would make more sense. I'm sure that eventually Substack will get to that business model.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the other thing is, Substack allows you, like my domain name on Substack is thatwastheweek.com. That leverages the distributed nature of the internet, the domain name system. And you can type in thatwastheweek.com and go to it. I have another Substack at work, which the name is signalrankupdate.substack.com, where I don't pay to use my own domain because I really don't care. So it's really up to you whether you leverage decentralized tools to look independent or feel independent. You can change the what's called the CSS on Substack. That's the way you describe how things look, where you can change fonts, for example, and things like that. So you can do it if you.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'm sure they've thought about is empower their users to aggregate themselves. So, Keith, you and I, we could do Keen On, that was the week, and we find 30 other newsletters that we like. We aggregate them together, and then we charge a monthly or annual rate to access all of them.
Correct.
If they have, I'm sure they've thought of that. Would that be viable, do you think?
I think
Or
what
would
would
that be one
happen.
step too far? They'd lose control of the product.
Well, I think they'll figure out that the long tail of Substacks that don't earn money from paid subscribers, that would be a good strategy. But probably the top 10 or 100 wouldn't participate because they're making enough all by themselves.
Well, it comes back to this theme of re-centralization, decentralization. For better or worse, it's a winner take all economy. So you have Substack, but you have the Andrew Sullivans and one or two others on it who do all the damage. They're the ones with millions of followers and creating huge amounts of revenue. And there's the rest of us. There's the long tail, there's the winner take all, and there's nothing in between. And that's just the reality of this economy in this world.
Exactly. And if these people put their brain into a different domain, they'd get comfortable. Everyone knows that startups are dominated by something called the power law. The power law is where there's a few winners and lots of losers, and a lot in the middle. And that's another way of talking about this trend for things to get big and other things not to get big. That's centralization. It's really sour grapes that you're not in that top power law group when you point the finger at that group. I don't see any intellectual merit in the argument at all.
And this isn't a new theme. One of our interview of the week, you generously made my interview with John Markoff, the legendary New York Times reporter. He's been in the Valley probably longer than anyone. He's covered everyone. And I talked to him on Keen On, it was episode 2250, about all these long-term themes and the stuff with Stuart Brand, and he's written a book. His last book was a biography of Brand, his experiences with Jobs. Nothing much has changed. I mean, the themes that Brand and Jobs were dealing with are the same today, aren't they?
They're the same, but they get reproduced on new platforms at greater scale.
Yeah, it's the scale. I mean, it's that Silicon Valley term scale. It's just so much scaled up. The billions, the hundreds of billions, eventually the trillions. And of course, even the Substack, I think the Substack hate was triggered, or the Substack attention this week was triggered by the fact that apparently Musk, who everybody hates, understandably, I know you're more of a fan than I am, but Musk offered to buy Substack and they turned him down. I think it actually speaks quite highly of Hamish and Best and the others at Substack. They didn't want to become part of Musk's empire.
Yeah.
Anyway, your startup of the week also sort of touches on this. Revolut. This comes out of a story that they raised a lot of money, Keith. So why did you make Revolut there to launch mortgages, smart ATMs, and business credit products? It's a fintech product out of the UK.
Yeah. So Revolut, the history of Revolut is that it was funded by Seed Camp in London.
That's Klein, your friend in London, right?
Saul was one of the founders at Seed Camp, but he left a long time ago. It's now run by Carlos and Reshma Sohoni, and they picked Revolut. They also invested in TransferWise, so they look for fintech products. And London, for those who don't know, London's regulatory system allows startups in fintech because there's a requirement of the banks to create sandboxes that allow startups to interact with bank APIs. So you can do it in London easier than anywhere else. And Revolut did it. They built a great banking application that basically made foreign currency transfers free within an app. So when you travel, and your credit card can use whatever currency is in your wallet, which can be any currency. So it's really well thought through. They got a banking license last year, which means that they can now go well beyond sitting on top of the existing banks. And so they're now spreading out into mortgages and other products, which they're already huge. They're now going to become huger. And I put them in there just because they
I have
are
to do a grammatical correction, Keith. There's no such word as huger.
huger. Okay, we can maybe make it up.
More huge. I think you can say more. I don't think you can say more huge. Huge is already huge. You can't be huger.
More huge. Anyway, it kind of goes along with another article this week about IPOs taking 13.6 years. Revolut is not a young company, but it's still a private company.
Right, but it also comes to the theme of this centralization and re-centralization. Everyone hates their banks. It's like everyone hates universities. Everyone hates the healthcare system. Everyone hates their government. So these fintech companies are seen as being ideal. And yet, on the other hand, the other news this week is that from the FT, that early Revolut investors cashed out at least 300 million in share sales this week. So, it goes both ways. And if Revolut is successful, they'll just become the new reality. They'll become the new bank, won't they?
Well, I hope so. I use Revolut and I think it's fantastic. And I also use Citibank historically, and it is not fantastic. So I hope Revolut takes over everything right now, just because they're better.
Are they the Substack of the financial services business?
They're certainly one of them. I think there's others as well.
No, it's interesting. But again, similar themes, huge promise. I know you were very taken with a piece this week on Siberia, the world's first ever cyber cafe. You were involved back then in the 90s. What does this piece in Vice tell us about the cycles again, Keith, of all this promise of democratization and decentralization, and then the result?
Yeah, I mean, Siberia is 30 years old this year. And that's a picture of my wife on the left and Eva Pascal on the right, who were the two people that were most famous for Siberia. Eva's a force of nature, and she was the one who invited.
Your wife, Keith, don't underestimate.
As is my wife, but Eva invited Douglas Rushkoff to the first event at Siberia, and he had a book called Siberia in those days. So that's how that came to happen. This is a look back to that era, which was 1994.
Yeah, as Vice says, back in the 90s, before the internet was evil.
Yeah, and Eva is kind of a child of that era. She likes cyber culture, as she would call it, which crosses over into literature, fashion, music. She talks a lot in this piece about warehouse parties with house music and the like. So Siberia, in a way, was part of a shift in culture that technology for the first time became part of. If you think about it, up until then, there was never really any technology in any of those movements like mods, rockers, teddy boys. Maybe you could call a motorbike technology, but this was the first time when technology became cool. And it's really stayed cool ever since, I think.
Well, I think that's wrong, Keith. It's not cool. Back in the 90s, before the internet was evil, it may be cool for white guys like you and I, but it's not cool for young kids. I don't think technology is the problem, I think, increasingly. But that's another subject. Finally, I suggested this Mark Andreessen X post. I don't know, you left it out, but it really astonished me. Andreessen, um, after the Musk appointments and the various other Trump things this week, on November the 8th, he wrote an X, and this is from Andreessen himself. I mean, he doesn't tweet that often. He wrote, everyone involved in the long-standing illegal joint government university company censorship apparatus should take care to preserve their files and communications. Sunlight is coming. I found that, I have to admit, I'm not, again, a great fan of Andreessen, a particularly chilling and weird X. What would you say about this? I mean, here's a man, he's a multi-billionaire, and he's calling for some sort of purge of what he calls the government university company censorship apparatus. It sounds Stalinist.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, you just reminded me. I did put that in a draft of the newsletter the day you sent it to me, and then I lost that draft for some reason. And
I know why, because you wanted to have a picture of your wife in the post of the week. But this is, I mean, you should have the Siberia in the newsletter, but I would put that one back in. I think it's a really chilling.
Look,
and if he's being, I don't think Andreessen is a man with a great deal of irony or sense of humor. I think he meant it seriously.
No, Andreessen does have a sense of humor, but it's a dry sense of humor. And this is not humorous, though. There's two things about this. The first is what is valid in it. What is valid in it is that the cancel culture that we all know that lives on campuses and in various centralized publications, in quotes, had its ass handed to it in the election. Normal people don't like it, and so
but let's be clear, normal people don't like some of its most absurd manifestations. I mean,
but it's a bit like Brexit. The absurd manifestations end up branding the whole thing.
Right, but normal people aren't racist. They're not in favor of, subjugating women or people of different color skin.
Yeah, but they're also not in favor of censorship. I don't think. And Andreessen is catching on to a legitimate theme, and then he's promising retribution.
Right, against what? Are you going to shut the universities down?
Obviously not. But
what does that even mean?
So then you're right. Let's characterize this as a slightly childish tweet, and let's hope that Andreessen isn't going to adopt the same methods by trying to shut down points of view he disagrees with.
Right, and it's very, shall we say, Muskian, although Andreessen himself perhaps is more Musk than Musk himself. I mean, this idea sunlight is coming is particularly chilling. I really found that X to be disturbing. A multi-billionaire, man of enormous power to write something like this.
I don't mind it if I interpret it as meaning free speech is coming. I do mind it if he means retribution is coming.
Yeah, but for Andreessen, he can say what he likes anyway. I mean, so can Musk. They don't care.
Yeah.
These guys have the classic, what in Silicon Valley is called fuck you money. They can say whatever they like to anyone they like. No one can do anything to them.
The other funny thing, Andrew, is Andreessen is the biggest user of blocking on Twitter or X.
Right. So he's the ultimate censor.
Yeah. He censors what he gets to read. And one could argue that's okay because he's not censoring anyone else from seeing it, but he definitely has an instinct to close things down.
Yeah, it's not okay, and I will say it. And I think he's a particularly disturbing manifestation of these new multi-billionaires who, for one reason or another, seem to be controlling the fate of everything, government to university companies. So it's particularly chilling, especially as an investor. I mean, he's shaping the future in AI. What does that suggest about all his investments in AI?
Well, the nature of investing is that you're jumping on the next big thing. And to be honest, he has very little power. He may think he has more power than he actually has, but he has very little power. His entire life depends on entrepreneurs coming up with good ideas, and none of them come from him.
Well, there you have it, Mark Andreessen. If you're watching, Keith Teare says you have no power. You're much less powerful than you think. You're irrelevant. You depend on entrepreneurs. I hope he's right, Keith. We will talk again next week. Interesting week on decentralization, re-centralization. It's not a theme that will go away. Have a great week and talk in a week. Thanks so much.
Bye.